Video game adaptations tend to have this defined and long-lasting reputation of being some of the worst films to come out in cinema. Year after year, project after project, there tends to be this ongoing and non-stop trend of video game adaptations being worse than the last one. And it goes on from there. From being a financial joke to being crapped upon by reviews, there's no stopping this crap fest. And this year's line of video game adaptation seems to further escalate this ongoing problem, with films that are shown to actually have potential and promise to only wind up disappointing and make believers into bitter, regretful, Dorito-fueled regretters. But why does this trend continue to keep on going? Why do video game adaptations keep getting worse year after year? Well, I believe there are numerous, and I do mean numerous, reasons on why these films tend to suck. And I can easily link to a lack of creative control, major studio interference, a bad script, a bad director, not understanding the source material you are adapting on screen, and even a rating that's too tame for this certain film. When you have some of these elements and apply it to a movie that's based on something that has a fandom, a big fandom, and that movie fails to deliver these crazed, hyped up fanboys and fangirls' expectations, it damages on what makes the original source material special. And no one's gonna back up the movie during its theatrical run. And if it's a movie that solely relies on fandom support, because mainstream audiences aren't gonna know what the hell this is, or even care if they're not that invested in the source material, then you fail on your behalf. However, there is a way to actually make, and I'm not exaggerating, a good video game adaptation. How, you may ask, is that possible? What secrets are there to make the assumption true? Is it the same material as the Krabby Patty secret formula? Why aren't you telling us right now, fat man? Well, after an extensive investigation, meaning I have spent 6 hours on my couch watching movies, I came to the conclusion that, are you ready for this? Don't make a direct adaptation. Don't make a movie about Grand Theft Auto, but make a movie that uses elements of the game, yet still have the movie be its own thing. Don't make a Mario movie. Oh, well, too late for that. But make a movie that pays tribute to the old school while trying to be its own creation. This occurs all the time in films, where a film would include visual references from another movie that the director would include because he or she is a huge fan of the original work. This is called a homage. You're honoring something you love that inspires you by putting it in your work, yet still creating your own thing. For instance, the biggest example of this is the great Netflix series Stranger Things, where the entire show is a direct homage to 70s and 80s horror, sci-fi, and coming-of-age movies. It uses these references to either create this world honoring films or use elements of the films that are being honored in the show to fuel the story that the original creators intended to share. This can apply to video game adaptations, where there are films that have done this in either a more subtle or a more in-your-face fashion. And I have chosen 3 movies that have done it right and would consider the best video game adaptations so far that are not direct adaptations to video games. So consider this 3 reviews. For starters, Crank from 2006, directed by Neville Dean and Taylor, is the best adaptation of Grand Theft Auto you'll ever see. Instead of calling the film by the game's title, the film is influenced by the style and raw elements of the video game that helps give the movie its own footing. The fact that the film's pacing and how the main character would go to location after location, the extensive violence and property damages, sex appeal, vulgarity, and the overall tone gives the audience a connection to the GTA video games and how somewhat similar it is. Yet the film still manages to be entertaining and be its own thing. Next is the 2012 Disney animated film, and by far the most recognizable name in the entire list, Wreck-It Ralph, which is the best video game adaptation ever made not based on a video game. Instead of the film being a movie about Sonic or Mario or Q*bert, it's a film that takes place in a video game universe, where these characters actually exist within the world. Think of it as a more video game centered Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where it blends the old-fashioned retro video games with the ultra-realistic looking violent RPG open world video games of now. with subtle visual commentaries over the old and new. What makes it work is that it has a story of its own that's not based on a beloved, already established character. It's not even about the hero, but Fix-It Felix's video game villain, Ralph, who is an obvious parody of Bowser and Donkey Kong, even though Bowser is in the movie. But the whole game is an obvious nod to Mario. And that's what makes the film's universe so fascinating and awesome, because you are already establishing all these characters in other previous video games. But what makes it even better is the film's story, animation, great and sympathetic characters that, while having an extensive cast of familiar, non-pixelated characters, simply works on its own. And finally, by far the most recent film of the bunch, Hardcore Henry, which is freaking awesome. The obvious factor of this film to address is that it is a first-person film. It captures the spirit of any first-person shooter game ever made that doesn't link to any specific game. This movie is the definition of a video game adaptation. It also feels like an hour and 36-minute long GoPro camera commercial, but it's still awesome. The way the character goes from scene to scene, and even moments before the huge action scene, gives the illusion of video game cutscenes. It's absolutely insane, awesome, and hilarious at the same time. And that's what makes these films far superior than any other video game adaptation that Hollywood would crap out the past decade. Because the creative control is there, ideas are being expressed, and these films are more focused on telling their own stories and not be forced to insert fan service to a specific game that fans want to see only to be even more disappointed. To not blatantly mock and ruin what was a good source material, but to inspire and be inventive on how you can use elements of something to make something in your own vision. Oh, and if you're wondering why Pixels isn't mentioned here, some of us want to forget that thing ever existed.